We are live. Alexander, we are ready to roll.
Mm-hmm.
Let me open up these windows here. All right. Okay, so this is a quick live that we wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
How's everyone doing out there on the chat, on the live stream? I'm not sure how many people will have joining us, Alexander, for this one. Like a 10-minute notice.
10-minute notice. And the subject, which I accept, is perhaps not the world leading headline, but nonetheless it's an important event for the people who are themselves involved in it, and it is a country in Europe which is in a pivotal place in Europe. So I think it's appropriate that a channel like ours, which seeks to cover news, geopolitical news, that we should address it.
All right. Dimitri says loud and clear. Artem, how you doing, Artem? Pam, how are you?
Mm-hmm.
Rob, how you doing, Rob? Northern Fox from the Netherlands. Sound and visual is great. Thank you very much. Northern Fox, Alan, how are you doing, Alan? How are things in the UK? I am joined by Alexander Mercouris, who is also in the UK. Alexander, how are you this evening?
I'm very well. We've got cooler weather now, so after a very prolonged heat wave, it's a bit of a relief, actually. You hear lots of cars, I'm afraid. So I'm sorry if there's a bit of background noise, but
it's all right. We'll get through this. Okay, so guys, welcome to an impromptu live stream. Alexander actually sent me the news about Belarus, and we did a video on Belarus about I'd like to say about a week ago, maybe.
That's right.
After the elections.
Exactly.
Last Sunday, I guess, for the elections,
Sunday,
yeah.
Yes.
So we did hey, Spartan Warrior Queen, how are you doing? Good to have you here. All right, Ruby's 2000 from Mississippi. Great to have you here. All my best to everyone in Mississippi. And Gear from Norway. All my best to everyone in Norway as well. Johannesburg. Hello to everyone in Johannesburg. I hope you enjoyed our video we did on South Africa that we put up today as well. And we hope you're doing well in South Africa. So from Canada as well, all our best to everyone in Canada. So Alexander, the news, what we thought the news cycle was going to be for Belarus was that there was going to be protests for a couple of days. We knew that Lukashenko, the current president of the incumbent president of Belarus, and what you would call the last remaining dictator in Europe, I guess, even though it's not a brutal kind of dictatorship, but either way, he is the last dictator in Europe. We knew he probably won about 50 to 55% of the vote, not 80 like he claimed. The opposition also, you noted, didn't win 80% of the vote as they claimed either. So we thought it was probably around maybe a 55%, somewhere around there, a small victory for Lukashenko. He does have support within the country, but not as high as he claims to have. But the protests did not die down as we thought they would. As a matter of fact, they have gained strength. And it looks like we may be on the cusp of the first government collapse post or during this pandemic that we're living in. Not that it's due to the pandemic, even though there may be economic factors there. But we may really see a government collapse in Europe. And this is an important story because Belarus does sit in between Russia and the EU. It's very important to Russia. The West has been trying to sway Belarus towards their side as well. This all reminds me of something that happened in 2013, 2014, just not as violent. And that is Ukraine and the Maidan. So my first question to you, Alexander, is how is what is going on right now similar to Maidan? How is what is going on right now different to Maidan?
Right. Well, there are similarities, but there are also very, very important differences. Now, what I think what happened was this. I mean, clearly the 80% that Lukashenko claimed he had is a wildly inflated figure. I don't think anybody actually takes that seriously. That there were going to be protests, everybody knew there were going to be protests. What I think happened was that Lukashenko's security forces grossly and disproportionately overreacted. And I mean, there was extraordinary scenes of violence in the first on Sunday and Monday and Tuesday nights. And what I think capped it was an absolutely grotesque film that the Belarusian Interior Ministry published, in which they showed, lots of young people had been arrested in their thousands, sort of, crouching and, being held in very, very harsh conditions in detention. And I think that really shocked and upset an awful lot of people. And I think that gave color to a lot of the claims that were being made by Lukashenko's opponents, that he's not just a dictator, but that he's a brutal dictator. I mean, he had support because he told a lot of Belarusians, people, in factories and farms all over the country, that he looked after them. And I think these images, I think they shattered that impression. So what has now happened is that the actual protests that were happening overnight have basically fizzled out. We've now seen a sort of second wave of protests, which are coming from factories with industrial workers complaining and protesting and saying we don't want to live in a country where this kind of violence happens. And I understand from what I have been able to work out that it's not true that factories have so far gone on strike, but there has been unrest in those factories. The management have had to speak to the workers, and there's been a large protest group from one of the factories, the Minsk tractor works, that have gone to the government building to speak to people there. Now, Lukashenko is still president. The security forces are still loyal to him. He hasn't yet completely lost control of the situation. It could swing back to him over the next couple of hours. He's still speaking. He's not given up. So, we mustn't yet write his obituary. The next 48 hours, the weekend, is going to be absolutely crucial. And of course, the other thing that he's done is, you're absolutely right to say that, this is a very important country from the Russian point of view, but he has incensed the Russians to an extraordinary degree. We were talking a short time ago about the arrest of the 33 Russian mercenaries that were passing through Ukraine. The Wagner mercenaries. He has resisted every single attempt that Putin made over the course of this year to deepen Belarus's integration with Russia. That might, by the way, have lost him some support in Belarus itself. I mean, some of these people in the factories that we're talking about depend on, the Russian market, depend on links with Russia. So there may be some issue there. So he got a congratulatory message from Putin, which was incredibly stiff and very cold, and basically was a list of demands. So there is a perception, I think, right across Belarus from every side of the political spectrum that he's not yet out. He's still there. He might hold on, but he's lost his touch. He looks vulnerable, and the pressure on him now is growing. So we'll see what happens over the next 48 to 72 hours. If he's still here, if he's still there on Monday, and we don't have a general strike next week, which is looking possible, but by no means certain, then he might still have to hold on. He might still be able to hold on, but he'll be in a very weakened position.
All right, true or false, Alexander? The mainstream media narrative at this moment is that Lukashenko is Putin's guy, that Russia is panicking that they're going to lose Belarus, they're going to lose Lukashenko, and in essence lose Belarus, and that the EU should proceed with sanctions. They should continue to rally the crowds. And get rid of Belarus so that they can get rid of Lukashenko so they can swing Belarus into the European orbit. So in other words, Lukashenko is with Russia. The EU has a chance to take Belarus and have it switch teams. Is that true or not true?
Some truth in it and some not. Some parts of it are not so true. First of all, Lukashenko is not especially pro-Russian. I mean, there was a time in the 1990s when he was positioning himself as Russia's great friend. But when Putin appeared on the scene, he cooled on that considerably. And as I say, he's consistently resisted all attempts to develop integration mechanisms with Russia. And he's constantly picked fights and quarrels with the Russians, very much to the Russians' exasperation. He's taken lots of money from them. He's not backed them on many things. And he's shown great sympathy for Ukraine, which has really annoyed the Russians considerably. I mean, he refused to recognize Crimea as part of Russia. Well, that was perhaps asking a lot of him. But he also apparently promised the Russians after the 2008 Georgia war that he would recognize the two breakaway republics from Georgia, Abkhazia, and South Ossetia, and he didn't do it. And that, I know, has caused a lot of anger in Moscow. And I remember the Russian president of that time, Medvedev, actually going on television and actually criticizing Lukashenko over it. So he's certainly not Russia's man. I think this is a complete myth. There's no reality to it. Belarus is, unfortunately, very much part of a tug of war between some people in the European Union and the Russians. Now, most people in Belarus still have very positive sentiments towards Russia. And Lukashenko's actions over the last couple of weeks, as I say, he's picking with quarrels with the Russians, the Wagner episode, all of that will have done one thing in the context of this crisis, is that, of course, for most people, it will have distanced Lukashenko from Russia in the eyes of many of the people who are protesting against Lukashenko in Belarus. There are undoubtedly some very pro-EU people amongst the opposition. But in the election itself, which took place, it was striking that relations with Russia were not an issue. The opposition avoided bringing that subject up because I think they realized that this is not an issue that gains a great deal of traction with many people in Belarus. And there are some people in the opposition who would actually, I think, want better relations with Russia. One of the opposition leaders, in fact, before the election, when Lukashenko wanted to arrest him, fled to Russia. So it's a more complicated picture than that narrative says. But clearly there is a tug of war. And I have to say, I don't think that helps the situation in Belarus at all. I think the right thing to do is to let things take their course, let people in Belarus sort out their own government, leave Belarus alone. And I also think, by the way, that there will be some people in the EU, especially, I should say, in Germany, where I'm familiar with sentiment there, who do feel a great deal of EU expansion fatigue and will not want to get into another issue, another quarrel with Russia like the one they have with Ukraine. So we'll see how this pans out. It's not yet clear how this is going, but that tug of war exists. Those geopolitical factors are there. The Russians are watching the situation very carefully. And of course, there is interference and meddling from the EU side.
Why and who is pushing the EU to place sanctions on Belarus? I'm trying to understand, what does the EU gain by putting sanctions on Belarus because of what they claim are election improprieties?
Well,
this is the EU lecturing other countries about democracy and elections. The EU, I mean, well, come on now. What do they have to gain by doing this?
Right. Well, can I just also say something? I mean, if we're talking about hypocrisy, and I am going to engage in a bit of whataboutism here, and I think validly so. I mean, they talk about the violence of the police against the protesters in Minsk. What about the violence of the police in Paris against the protesters, the yellow vest protesters in Paris? I mean, that was at least as bad as anything we have seen in Minsk. So, for the EU to start, getting on a high horse and lecturing people in Belarus about what the police there do, that does seem to me absolutely, I'm going to say it makes me want to reach for my vomit bag, frankly. Now, there are some people in the EU who are, I think, wary of this, but there is a core of countries, and Poland, Lithuania, some of the Baltic states, basically, who consistently want to follow this very anti-Russian line. They want to basically draw all the former republics away from Russia, and ultimately, I think, in the case of Poland, want to break up Russia itself. I mean, that is their overweening agenda. I get the impression that there are people in Germany, and of course and in France, I mean Macron also, who are becoming absolutely sick and tired of this policy and don't want to be carried along with it all the time. And as I understand it, the sanctions that people are talking about imposing on Belarus are going to be of a very, very, pallid kind. They will probably be sanctions against individuals, as opposed to the kind of big sectoral sanctions that were imposed on Russia and after the 2014 crisis. So we're not getting a completely clear message from the EU, and I don't think this is as big an issue. I don't think some people in the EU want to see a big fight with Russia over Belarus. But there are some people in the EU, in Poland, in the Baltic states, in Sweden, who do want to detach Belarus from Russia. I don't think that's what the people of Belarus want, by the way.
All right, so I've got a couple of good friends in Minsk, actually, and reliable people that I know in Minsk, and they tell me that for 3 days last week, the Lukashenko government cut all internet access, a large portion of the mobile phone access. So he pretty much left everyone in the dark for 3 days.
Yes.
They also said that at some of the protests, which were peaceful, and they did say that the protests were peaceful and were very well organized, there were rumors and there were people talking about Ukraine agitators there.
Yeah.
Now, of course, I can't confirm that, and I'm getting this from people that I know in Minsk who have told me that that's what they heard. It wouldn't surprise me if there were Ukraine regime change specialists, so to speak, there, because this is a multi-hybrid war that's being fought out in the region. So it wouldn't surprise me at all. It doesn't shock me. That's my first comment and question to you. Going off of that, Alex, how involved do you think the U.S., the CIA, the NGOs, the George Soros types are in this situation right now?
Right, let's take it three things in turn. Firstly, you're absolutely right. Lukashenko did impose all these internet restrictions and mobile phone restrictions, and I think that was a big mistake, actually. He did the same thing, by the way, during the pandemic. He sort of imposed a clampdown, which I think did undermine trust in him because people weren't sure what was going on. And I mean, I also have friends in Belarus, or to be more precise, my wife does. And they were all getting very concerned, and they were saying, what is going on in our own country? We don't know. And that made people very worried. And I think that did undermine trust in him. And I think the whole behavior of the police and of Lukashenko over the course of those 3 days was completely misconceived. That there were agitators from Ukraine, and by the way, some of them from Russia, people involved with Khodorkovsky's organization, Open Russia. Notice the name Open Russia connects with Open Society Foundation. Who is the backer of that? It's always the same people. I'm sorry.
Khodorkovsky, you mean Yukos?
Yukos, but when anything that causes up open, immediately, I'm sorry to say, this links to Soros, and not just, Soros, but all sorts of other people who are involved with the whole world of NGOs and all that. They're obviously involved, but I don't think that they represent the majority feeling of people in Belarus, not by any stretch. And yes, They will agitate. They will create problems. I think in the end, Belarus will settle down and find its own way. I'm, optimistic about this, but we will see. And Lukashenko, who was, I think, in a reasonably strong position, has managed through grotesque overreaction and extreme violence of his police. And as I said, that film which I've seen was just shocking. And that was that his interior ministry, his own police forces put up this film. I mean, it's ludicrously grotesque to see. I think that did upset a lot of people in what is basically a very law-abiding and peaceful country. So Ukrainian agitators, certainly. Russian agitators, definitely. NGOs involved, absolutely. All the usual paraphernalia of the color revolution things definitely were there. If Lukashenko had played this thing wisely in the way that, say, Putin did in 2011. Remember what Putin did? The people wanted to protest in 2011. He said, right, you protest. We organize it. We negotiate the terms of your protests. You can meet on Bolotnaya Square and Sakharovsky Avenue in Moscow. You can, have your protests, carry them out peacefully, all of that. And if that had happened, if he'd played it that way, I'm sure this thing would have run its course and fizzled out, despite the fact that he didn't get 80% of the vote, as he claimed. But instead, clearly feeling extremely, one senses that he was feeling that his position was less strong than it was. He used violent force against predominantly peaceful protesters, and now he has a crisis on his hands.
All right, stay with Putin, Alexander, and I want to give you a little bit of pushback on Putin. Many people criticize Putin for the way he handled the Maidan. Some people say he didn't act quickly enough, he didn't act smart enough. I mean, okay, there's a lot of theories as to how, for lack of a better word, Russia lost Ukraine, lost their influence in Ukraine, however you want to phrase it.
Yes.
Do you think that he's undergoing the same type of situation with Belarus? And do you think that Vladimir Putin, who has been an exceptional leader, I would say, over the past, since he took office, a one-of-a-kind type of leader, but do you think he may be losing his touch here? I mean, it seems like he's running into a lot of walls lately, whether it's Syria or Duran. Obviously started with Ukraine, and it just seems that they are gunning for him. There's no doubt about it.
No.
And there was a time where against Obama, he was checkmating Obama at every turn. But now it seems like he's running out of gas, it seems. I don't know.
Well, I'm going to say something about Putin. The first thing I'm going to say about Putin is that the big lesson he's got to take from these events in Belarus is that a leader who tries to stay on indefinitely, which is what Lukashenko was doing, eventually creates the very instability that he is supposed to be preventing. And I think if Putin seriously intends to remain Russia's president for another 12 years at the conclusion of his term, of this term that he's now running, then he really needs to look at what happened at Belarus and realize that this is a bad and misconceived strategy, and that he should, in fact, start thinking about creating his own transition. Because a leader who overstays his time runs the risk of seeing everything fall apart. And I wasn't happy, and I've said this very clearly in several videos, by this latest amendment that was thrown into this constitution at the last moment, which will allow Putin to stand another 12 years. I think that was a mistake. I think that shouldn't have happened. I think if it was clear that Putin was leaving in 2024, as everybody had supposed at the beginning of this year, then that would have actually created more stability in Russia, not less. That's my first criticism. Now, as for Ukraine and what happened there, yes, I think the Russians did mishandle handled Ukraine. I don't think this happened in 2013-14. I think they mishandled Ukraine over many, many, many years.
People forget there was a revolution before the Maidan revolution.
Absolutely.
Russia didn't get the memo then.
No, exactly. They didn't get the memo. They didn't prepare for it. They didn't work to create influence there. They didn't sort things out in Ukraine in the way they should have done. I don't think it is the same in Belarus, actually. I think that they have been much more careful in sorting out their policies with Belarus. And obviously, in a tug-of-war situation such as we're seeing with Belarus, it's not so easy. But they have many, many more people on their side. If I can put it, I don't want to. I hate to talk about people being on one side or another. Can I say it clearly? It is the EU and the regime changes and those people who force those kind of either or situations on us. But I think if we get into that kind of position, I think the Russians have far more to work with in Belarus than they did in Ukraine. So I don't think that they've lost the game in Belarus. The simple fact is Lukashenko was an impossibly difficult person to work with. And there's no way you can get around this. He's a strong-minded man, very conceited, didn't want to play second fiddle with Putin. He was constantly playing games with the Western powers against the Russians. He recently, only a few years ago, reopened the US embassy in Minsk. He actually negotiated with the EU the cancellation of sanctions on Belarus. People forget this. I mean, he was actually tilting towards the EU against the Russians at one time. So, and we had this Wagner nonsense 10 days ago. So it's very difficult to work with someone like Lukashenko. And in some ways, if he were to be removed from the scene, it would open up Belarus. And in that kind of situation, maybe some of the sort of feelings that people have in Belarus would rise to the surface, and that might actually play to Russia's advantage. By the way, I should make one thing absolutely clear. I don't think that a union, a merger of Belarus with Russia is on anybody's agenda. I think what the Russians would want to see is a preservation of the economic links that they have with Belarus. Factories like Mars and Belarus, which have long-standing connections with the Russian industrial system. And at the same time, obviously, they don't want Belarus in NATO and they don't want Belarus in the EU. Opinion polls show vast majority of people in Belarus don't want Belarus part of NATO. I think it's something like 3-1. In terms of the EU, it might be a bit different, but overall, people in Belarus still value the connection to Russia.
Yeah, on that point, Alexander, I will agree with you. I will say that Lukashenko, you're exactly right. Lukashenko was constantly playing games. Yes. Nobody likes people that play games. You can't work with them. No, it's that simple. You can't do business with anyone that's constantly playing games and playing you off against other people, whether it's playing the EU off against Russia, playing Russia off against the EU, playing the US off against Russia, Russia off against the US. That's what Lukashenko was doing all the time. And I think everyone, both sides, kind of got sick of it. I think if Lukashenko does go, and it looks like we are seeing the last days of Lukashenko, I don't know if it'll be now or if it'll be later, but there's no doubt that he's been hurt badly by this. And I don't think
absolutely. I think he's wounded. I mean, he's fatally wounded.
He's on borrowed time.
He's on borrowed time. I mean, it may be next week or it may be in a year's time, but he's not going to be there for very much longer. I mean, let me ask you one more thing. Comparing Belarus to Ukraine, which I think a lot of people will compare, and I actually compared it in the title when I said a Maidan moment. But there's a big difference with Belarus and Ukraine in that Belarus is a much more homogeneous country. Where Ukraine is really, and much better about the history than I do, is really a kind of like three countries in one kind of thing. It is.
Ever since World War II, and the Bolshevik Revolution has kind of been stitched together. And it's not a very uniform country at its core, where Belarus really is a uniform country, a homogeneous country. a proud country. And one final note, and you can wrap up the live stream, Alexander, with your thoughts and comments, and we'll go to some super chats. I think once Lukashenko does go, Belarus has a very, very bright future if it plays its cards right. They are extremely smart people, very clever people, very good at high tech. They have a lot of high tech companies, a lot of like Silicon Valley type businesses.
Yes.
And it's really booming there. I know one company, Wargaming, which has offices in Cyprus, and they were started out of Belarus.
Yes.
They have a really bright future, and I think it is one country that can, work very well with Russia, and can work very well with the European Union. And maybe there is some hope there to finally bridge, this constant, like you said, playing off EU, Russia, Russia, EU, this constant tension that we get, thrown at us all the time. Maybe Belarus can act more as a bridge than Ukraine ever could have been. Alexander, your comments, your thoughts, and wrap up the live and go to super chats.
I completely agree with that. I mean, Ukraine is three countries. I mean, there's eastern Ukraine, which was formerly, Novorossiya. It was part of a Russian province in the Russian Empire, where most people speak Russian, and some of them actually identify as Russians. You have central Ukraine, where people predominantly speak Ukrainian, but are Orthodox and had been part of the Russian Empire and were not anti-Russian historically, but were distinct from the rest of, the Russian-speaking population. And then there is Western Ukraine, the former Habsburg provinces, where they speak Ukrainian and are basically Catholic, Uniate Catholics, and are very anti-Russian. Now, there is nothing like that in Belarus. Belarus is a much, much more homogenous place. It is, as you correctly say, a very solid place. These sort of sentiments don't exist. And by the way, it's highly educated, very well educated people. It's got very strong industries. And it's also, as you absolutely rightly said, has a thriving IT sector, in fact, which always surprises people, but they're very good at that sort of thing. So I think it does have a potentially bright future. And, we said some horribly critical things about Lukashenko, and I'm not taking them back. But he has to some extent kept Belarus stable. He avoided, oligarchs appearing, and as happened in other parts of the former Soviet world in the 1990s. So there isn't the corruption in Belarus that you find in some other places. So I actually agree. I think it left to itself, it could actually do very well. I mean, I think its major links and its market are with Russia, but there is no reason why it shouldn't trade well with the EU also. The thing to do is for everybody, it's probably a council of despair in respect to some people in Brussels and Washington. The best thing to do is to just let it sort itself out and not engage in this constant tug of war, which in the end only destroys countries, when this country has a lot of promise and could be built up very well.
Yeah, I agree. EU, don't get involved. Things are such a mess within the EU. Don't go fiddling around and messing around in Belarus. You got so much work to do in your own house.
Absolutely. I mean, you just create more problems. I mean, look at Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine is in the mess it's in because of the way the EU meddled in it. So, I mean, just if you just leave it alone, then it can sort itself out. Now, I will say the EU leadership has not promised EU membership to Belarus. There's been no promise of NATO membership, and these were not issues in the elections. So, there's just a chance that things could be left to take their course. What the Russians need to do, by the way, is now that, Lukashenko clearly is tottering, they need to try and find someone to talk to in the political leadership. Perhaps they already do to some extent, instead of Lukashenko. I know they've been wanting to for some time, but whenever they tried to establish contacts with other Belarusian politicians, Lukashenko would always throw a hissy fit and accuse the Russians of plotting to try and overthrow him, and that would then all get unscrambled up, and there'd be all kinds of problems. So if Belarus is left to itself, not subjected to this tug of war, it's got a bright future. I agree.
All right, great. Let's do some super chats and wrap it up. From Chris W. Thompson, 10-pound super chat. Hey, I'd love an Iceland magic mug. Really appreciate your analysis. Cheers, Chris from Shetland. All right, Chris, we will create that Iceland mug. Absolutely. You got it. From Flying Boar, $5 super chat. Lukashenko shot himself in the foot by cozying up to the West by meeting Pompeo and then bad-mouthing Russia.
Absolutely. I mean, it was an idiotic policy. And by the way, I'm sure it lost him support in Belarus itself. I mean, some of these people who we see protesting, people, from the Maz factory, which is the big market for Maz trucks? It's Russia. Those people have an interest in good relations with Russia. They want to see good relations with Russia. I would have thought it's in their interests to see it. And of course, to have Pompeo turning up in that kind of way. And there was a lot of talk at the beginning of this year of the Belarus stopping imports of oil from Russia and taking it from the United States instead. It's a crazy policy to follow. It upset and annoyed the Russians intensely. It angered them hugely, and all it did in the end is, I'm sure it weakened his position.
Is there animosity between Lukashenko and Merkel, Belarus and Germany?
Apparently.
Is there?
Apparently there is, but no, I don't think on a particularly. I don't think Merkel thinks much about Lukashenko, if I have to be completely honest. Lukashenko's major interlocutors have not been the Germans, it's been the Americans.
Okay. From Moon Dragon 50 SEK, how could the Baltics destroy Russia?
Well, they can't. it's
the Baltics inside of the EU and NATO. How could they destroy?
Yeah,
Russia?
well. I mean, they could. They constantly agitate. But this is the thing about the Baltics. I've never been there myself, but my brother has been, and he tells me that in reality, the extent to which the Baltics are penetrated by Russian economic interests is not widely understood, but is extremely obvious when you are there. So they follow this extraordinarily anti-Russian policy, and they constantly play to anti-Russian feeling amongst the ethnic Baltic populations. But in reality, they are very dependent on Russia. And but together with Poland, they are and Sweden, by the way. I mean, there are certain politicians in Sweden who also have these sort of very, very entrenched anti-Russian attitudes. They play up all the time these criticisms of Russia, and they are the major problem that Russia has in working with the EU. But no, they're not going to succeed in breaking up Russia. I think that is a fantasy. I think that's impossible, and I think all it is doing is creating tensions where none need to exist.
All right. From William Jones, $5 super chat. I have been removed twice from Patreon as a Duran supporter. Only from the Duran. If it's you guys, fine. If not you guys, you need to know. Yes, we need to know. William, we don't. It wouldn't benefit us to remove someone from Patreon.
No.
So Patreon is doing something to your account. And just look, if you can shoot me off an email with your account, editor@theduran.com. Just shoot it off to me, or contact at theduran.com, either one, and I'll look into it. Thank you for letting us know, William. Really appreciate it. From Flying Boar, $5 super chat. Putin is soft. He is a paper tiger. If he wants to survive, then he is going to be like Stalin.
No, I think that if you know Russia, you can't rule Russia like Stalin ruled Russia. I mean, that world is gone. So and you can't talk of him as a paper tiger. He's been there now for 20 years. I mean, a paper tiger in Russia doesn't last for 20 years. So let's not talk about him in those terms. He has got to learn lessons from this event in Belarus, and he's got to understand, as I said, that he can't be ruler of Russia indefinitely. I think he does know that, actually. And I think that this idea of holding on for another 12 years beyond 2024 would be a big mistake. Yeah.
And back to the previous super chat, I saw someone in the live stream say Subscribestar. Yeah, you can also check out Subscribestar as well. That's another good option. But Alexander, I think you're right. All the even the greatest athletes
Yes.
They understand when it's time to hang it up.
Yes.
And
Yes.
but that's my big worry with Putin is that if you stay too long, then
you destroy your own legacy, and you create the very instability that you set out to prevent, which is what's happened with Lukashenko. I mean, if Lukashenko, I'm going to say it, as I said, I'm sure there'll be some people who won't agree with me, but Lukashenko, in my opinion, played a positive role in Belarus in the 90s and early 2000s. So he stabilized the base, he preserved its industrial base, he allowed this IT world to develop, he kept it free of oligarchs, he kept it largely free of corruption. But as time has passed, he became vain and conceited and increasingly autocratic, and he picked quarrels with the Russians, and he embraced bad actors like Mike Pompeo, and he has basically now put all that in jeopardy. So that's a lesson, and it's a lesson every leader must learn. There comes a point, my mother used to tell me, the height of good manners is to know when to leave.
Yeah, well said. From Flying Boar, $5 super chat. Who is blocking the Russian internet building in Belarus? That is Yandex. The protest in front of Yandex. So who is that?
I don't know, but what I will know is this: that there was a group of Lukashenko's police people actually raided the office at Yandex. So that sounds to me more likely Lukashenko's people. But that was a couple of days ago. What's happening today, I don't know. I mean, I haven't been able to follow every single detail of the news, but I would have thought this was again the police. By the way, the vehicle, the platform the protesters have used to keep protests going in Belarus has been Telegram, which is of course Russian owned. So it's not a Twitter thing; it's a Telegram thing.
Yeah, Telegram, the same guy that did VKontakte and was, from what some people say, forced to sell VKontakte. They'll argue. We don't know. I also think it's interesting. On a side note, Alexander, it's interesting how they're using the red and white flag. In this in these protests, it reminds me of when communism fell and people in Russia were walking around with the Russian flag, the flag that we know now.
Absolutely.
It's interesting to see that.
Yes, it is, and I mean, and that might have political. I mean, that might be a pro EU thing, or it might simply be a way of of creating distinctions between themselves and Lukashenko. We'll just have to see.
Yeah. All right. And the final super chat from Flying Boar. You think Poland and Ukraine will invade Belarus?
Oh, no. I think if anything like that happened, they would be resisted. And I think that would be a crisis on a simply enormous scale. But besides, Belarus is actually quite a strong army.
But Belarus is close to Poland as well. I mean,
it is. It's
diplomatic.
Well, this is the paradox, because Lukashenko has actually at times sought good relations with Poland. I'm going to say it. I mean, he played an insanely overambitious game. I think it's exactly what you said, Alex. I mean, if you start playing people off against each other, all you will do in the end is antagonize everybody and lose what support you have. So it was not a clever move. Why he did it is a good question. But I mean, I do generally believe that at a fundamental level, he and Putin didn't get on very well, and that he was constantly convinced that Putin was out to basically absorb Belarus and push him aside. And I think that was a huge mistake.
I wonder what other leader overplays his hand all the time. What other leader overplays his hand all the time?
Well, a certain Recep Erdogan springs to mind. I mean, Well, I think we did it. We discussed this on another program. That Lukashenko and Erdogan. I mean, they're the two enfants terribles on Russia's borders, and Putin has had massive problems dealing with both of them, and maybe he's not always handled them very well. But there we are.
All right, from Lindell, a question from the live stream, and we'll wrap it up. Says it's a lesson President Xi of China should be mindful of if he makes himself leader for life. If he makes himself leader for life, yeah.
Absolutely. Now, I mean, I think I should make one thing very clear about Xi Jinping, which is he is not China's leader for life. I mean, despite the fact that the media in the West constantly says that. I mean, the Chinese did away with, fixed terms, not fixed terms, but, limits on term limits. And maybe that was a mistake. Maybe it was a, correct thing to do, given the particular context with China going through itself an important transition, and they wanted a strong leader who would be a strong pair of hands to keep things stable for a certain period of time. But certainly a leader who goes on indefinitely and who is not Stalin, I mean, or Mao Zedong or someone like that, who can maintain their power through terror. Xi Jinping can't maintain his power through terror in China. Putin can't do it in Russia. That isn't possible anymore. So if you can't do it, then trying to maintain yourself in power forever brings down chaos upon yourself. There is a early example of this. I once studied Mexican history, and in the 19th century, Mexico had a leader called Porfirio Diaz, who was Mexico's leader for 50 years. And then when he fell, Mexico descended into a terrible civil war. So, he did a lot of things for Mexico while he was leader. But in the end, his legacy was a civil war. Now, I don't think that's going to happen to Belarus, but leaders need to understand that they have to leave in good time. Otherwise, if they don't, stagnation ensues, as happened in with Brezhnev in the Soviet Union, and things eventually start to fall apart, as it seems they're doing in Belarus now.
All right. On that note, we will end this live stream. You have any other comments or anything else to add, Alexander?
Well, we're in a flexible situation. We mustn't write Lukashenko off yet. I think, as I said, he's still got a chance to pull it together for the next couple of weeks. I mean, it seems we don't yet have a strike, and it seems there's some reluctance on the part of workers to actually take the further step of going on strike, and it seems the security forces are still working for him. But if he does survive this, he's certainly weakened, and people around him need to start telling him, Alexander, it's time to think about, retirement. You can't go on forever.
Yep. Nothing lasts forever.
Nothing lasts forever.
All right, guys, we'll leave it there. We will be monitoring this story, see if anything happens over the weekend.
Yes.
And we have all kinds of great videos coming up as well over the weekend. We're working hard for you guys to get you the news. Also, go to the Duran shop, pick up a magic mug. Alexander, this is my new favorite mug. It's a Serbia mug.
Serbia mug. Well,
it's really cool.
I love that. I do as well, actually. By the way, here's Russia. Alex correctly said this is the Russian flag. I mean, this is the thing about Belarus, was that Lukashenko came up with a sort of variant of the Soviet flag for Belarus. So it's understandable, perhaps, that some people want to distance themselves from that legacy also. But this is the flag of Russia that they had before the revolution, and in 1991 it came back.
Yeah, and Iceland is on the way.
And Iceland is on
the way. All right, Alexander, we'll sign off there.
We'll sign off there.
All right, guys, have a great weekend. Thank you for joining us on this live stream. Thank you for your super chats and your questions in the regular chat as well. We really appreciate it. Take care. Have a great Friday. And thank you, Spartan Warrior Queen, by the way. Thank you very much for all you do.